To support this show, become a Relax Your Grid superfan on Patreon. It's just $2 a month, and you'll receive exclusive digital content with every episode. Plus, I'll send you a Relax Your Grid sticker in the mail. Click the link in the show notes to sign up. Welcome to Relax Your Grid. I'm your host, Matt Brown. In this episode, I talked to Bluegrass fiddler Bronwyn Keith-Hynes about her formative fiddle years, her brilliant solo album, Fiddler's Pastime, and her experience with Mile 12, the Boston-based bluegrass band she co-founded with B.B. Bowness. Bronwyn is currently touring with Molly Tuttle and Golden Highway, so be sure to catch them when they play your town or favorite festival. Here's my conversation with Bronwyn. Bronwyn Keith-Hynes, welcome to Relax Your Grid.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start out with the award that you most recently won because it's so impressive. So you are the 2021 IBMA Fiddle Player of the Year. Congratulations.
Man, thank you. That was such a surprise and huge honor, and I still can't believe it.
It's well-deserved, and I think the coolest thing about it, and the reason I wanted to start here, is that you beat a slate of finalists who have all won the award before. So Jason Carter, Michael Cleveland, Stuart Duncan, and Deanie Richardson. These are not nobodies. These are fiddle icons of a couple different generations, but you're in this esteemed company, and I just think there's no better recognition in our world of bluegrass here than for you to beat those people in this particular contest.
Oh man, yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. It's just cool to be among them, or thought of, I guess, in the same category as them. And I don't really feel like I beat them, but it makes me want to work even harder. I feel like it's just encouragement and sort of I guess the recognition from peers and stuff just makes me want to work even harder and try to deserve it.
Yeah, I totally get that. So I read that the first fiddle style that you played was traditional Irish music. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Mostly, I started out doing Suzuki when I was real young. I was 3 when I started, and that's just what I ended up with. And my Suzuki teacher would teach me fiddle tunes on the side, just kind of regular American or whatever fiddle tunes. And I was really a lot more into those than the Suzuki stuff. So after a couple of years, my parents just asked me if I just wanted to do fiddle lessons. And actually the first fiddle teacher that I had was this lady up in Vermont. I was living in Vermont at the time, named Beth Telford, and she was a Cape Breton fiddler. So that's kind of the first thing I started out with. And then we moved to Virginia when I was 10, and I was, trying to find the nearest thing to Cape Breton fiddling, and there wasn't anybody doing Cape Breton fiddling in Virginia for whatever reason. So that's when I got into Irish fiddling. And I guess I went further with Irish fiddling, so I kind of say that was more of my background.
And then at what point did bluegrass take over as the thing that you were the most passionate about?
Bluegrass kind of took over in college. I went to Berklee College of Music, and it kind of just stumbled in there right at the first year that they started that American Roots music program. So this whole influx of amazing bluegrass and old time musicians was coming in, and it just the bug kind of bit me just hearing all these kids just being so great at that stuff.
So what was your first year at Berklee then?
2009.
Before we recorded, we were trying to figure out if you and I have ever met before. I remember visiting Berklee a bunch when Dominic Leslie and Sam Grisman were all students there, and I taught one of Matt Glazer's fiddle classes one day, but I can't remember that I ever overlapped when you were there. I know Hannah Reed was there around the same time, and I don't remember what year all of this was, but...
Right. I mean, that would have definitely been the same era for sure. I think maybe those people were a year or two ahead of me, so but yeah, I was definitely in school when they were in school, and yeah, it was a good scene.
Yeah, oh my gosh, so rich, and it's produced band after band, and I want to get to Mile 12, a band that you were a part of for quite a while and made a huge impact with, but I'm fascinated by this Irish and bluegrass journey for you, even though it started with Suzuki and Cape Breton, because about a year ago, a new private lessons student approached me and said he wanted to take Irish and bluegrass fiddle lessons with me. And so we did a couple weeks where, we learned Jerry's Beaver Hat, and then the first of the Peacock's Feather from the Frankie Gavin and Alec Finn record. And then we talked about the difference between Irish and bluegrass, which is quite large when you get into the nitty-gritty. And the next week we tried Lonesome Moonlight Waltz, and it was off to the races. And it's been a year of bluegrass ever since. And I just thought, we get pretty nerdy on this podcast, and I wanted to get your opinion of what are some of the similarities on the fiddle in particular between bluegrass and Irish, and then where does it diverge? Because I'll probably make him listen to this episode, and you're the first person I can talk to who's really had a foot in each.
Cool. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's, just... They've both got Irish music is like a dance music, right? And bluegrass is definitely more of a performance music, but it comes, one of its roots is Irish music and old time music, which is, it's got that dance stuff. So the instrumental fiddle tune part of bluegrass was definitely an easier thing for me to jump into than the singing songs and stuff and playing a hot break on a singing song. So that's kind of where I started sort of bridging the gap, was playing tunes that I'd known as Irish tunes, like Temperance Reel or St. Anne's Reel, and then sort of starting to improvise on them. And, I guess then they were bluegrass tunes. But, I think one of the challenges was just trying to get a different feel. I guess one thing I sort of realized was the Irish fiddle eighth note feel is a lot more dotted, I guess you could call it, or the notes are shorter too. They're less legato. So when I was trying to make it sound more bluegrass, I had to just have no space in between the notes and kind of have all the notes connect and be a lot more even. And that was, just kind of a weird thing. I mean, there were just a lot of different things in terms of technique that I'd sort of, I think I developed a certain way of playing when I was playing Irish music that didn't work as well when I was trying to do bluegrass. In Irish music, it's very rare that you'd get out of first position, seems like. So I didn't really bother to work on playing higher positions, or double stops would be kind of rare too. I mean, some people do some of them, but so just all this technical left hand stuff was definitely lacking.
Did you also find that you had to delete some of the technical left-hand stuff that's in Irish but not in bluegrass, like cuts and rolls and all of that ornamentation that we don't actually use in bluegrass?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a whole way of, kind of articulating notes and stuff. I feel like Alison Krause's playing has a lot more of that stuff than a lot of other bluegrass people. So that stuff comes really easily to me if I'm trying to mimic the stuff that she does, because that's, my left hand is so used to doing those little things. But yeah, a lot of times, I have to leave those out. Although I hear Stuart Duncan doing some of that stuff too. I don't know, people do a little bit of it, but yeah, it's different.
The thing about Stuart is I feel like he's good at bringing those ornaments in on non-bluegrass projects. He's played on so many records and soundtracks and in environments where he's not just trying to conjure up Kenny Baker or the long line of bluegrass fiddle that he's a part of and that you're a part of, where he gets to, evoke the old world in some way or another. And he has all of that ready and waiting, but it's not going to be in there when he plays, a duet with Bela or some of this other, more just American material.
He's shocking in how good and authentic he can play Celtic music. It's bonkers. I've only heard him do it a couple times, but I remember he did a set at IBMA with Gnome, just one of those duo things. And they did a Scottish set with a strathspey, and it was oh my gosh, you sound like a Scottish fiddler. And because that's not that easy for bluegrass fiddlers to go that direction.
When you got to Berklee, did you study with someone in particular who really threw you into the deep end with bluegrass fiddle, or how did your pedagogy go? And how formal was your bluegrass training, or was it the jamming that happened outside of the class?
I feel like there were lots of different teachers that gave me different pieces of it that really helped, and then the jamming was kind of the thing that made it all come together. I studied with Matt Glazer. And he had a lot of really helpful things to talk about as far as fiddle tune improv. He's got this whole system. You probably know about it, how to sort of improvise on a fiddle tune by breaking it down to its skeletal melody and then adding back in notes in different ways, but keeping the skeletal melody so it still sounds like the tune. All of that was helpful. And then Darol Anger, got to study with him, and he had some really helpful things to say about sort of like learning some of the basic kind of bluegrass songs that are so standard in terms of their melody and chord progression that if you learn them in a couple different keys, and then how many other songs that you actually know, like he kind of made that click for me. And then I studied with John McGann, who was a great teacher and played mandolin and guitar. And he passed away while we were at school, but for a couple of years, he was like one of the most helpful teachers in terms of helping me improvise. We'd play a game in our lessons called What's That? Or W. Yeah. But anyway, he would improvise, and I would just stop him and be like, what's that thing? And yeah, he was just super helpful.
And then you'd have to show it to you?
Mm-hmm. Then he'd have to show it to me.
I love that concept. I'm gonna do that to some of my students. At what point did you start to understand the fiddle's role on a singing song? Because as you said, that's a completely different animal. And for me, I have some very vivid memories of where it registered, like, oh, I have to do something completely different, or I have to not play, or I have to can you remember what the formative experiences were when you learned to back up a vocalist and then come forward and shine on a break?
Yeah. I mean, I think playing Mile 12 definitely helped with that. Like, just having the experience of getting to work with the same people all the time and just try different stuff out on these tunes that we would rehearse all the time. So I think that was probably the first time I would start to feel comfortable doing that. Yeah. But also I think even more recently, I like during the pandemic, I've had so much, time at home, and kind of used it to do a deep dive into a lot of the Bill Monroe and Flat and Scruggs and Bluegrass album band stuff. And, having the time to like learn a bunch of that fiddle stuff and analyze it, definitely helps.
Who have you been drawn to in that time? So like if it's Flat and Scruggs, it's maybe Paul Warren, and the Bluegrass album band, we're talking about Bobby Hicks. But like, do you find yourself like with a fiddle spirit animal that's helping you with some of these ideas? Or
I mean, I've been really digging the Chubby Wise stuff with Bill Monroe.
Okay.
I just like the groove of it. It's just so swingy and like simple but effective. Yeah, but yeah, a lot of the Benny Martin stuff with Flat and Scruggs too is just, epic.
I don't know if it was on Instagram or YouTube. I saw that you posted during the pandemic, you were learning solos, not just from fiddle players, but from the John Hartford Gentle on My Mind recording. You learned those two breaks that are right next to each other. The second one is Buddy Emmons' pedal steel solo, and you posted yourself playing along with that. So obviously you've gleaned a lot from learning from other instruments playing on songs as well.
Yeah, I should spend more time doing that. But yeah, I do love Buddy Emmons, and I've tried to learn some of his solos. But yeah, some of that steel stuff is really hard. It like has a huge range, so I constantly find myself running out of space, or the jumps are so weird that it's just hard to get those to happen.
It's such a great idea though, because it gets us out of like fiddle brain, like only thinking of things that fiddle players have done or only imitating fiddle players. Mm-hmm. I notice that if I try and take something from the fiddle to the guitar or the banjo to the fiddle, that even if I mess up, I'm messing up in a way that I wouldn't have before on a new instrument.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's awesome.
So you mentioned Mile 12, and tell me a little bit about how you came to play in that band. And I know you're no longer touring with them, and you've got an exciting tour coming up with Molly Tuttle. But where did Mile 12 start? Did that start out of your Berklee time?
Close. It started about a year after Berklee. I was like just living in Boston, hanging out, playing local gigs and teaching. And me and the banjo player, BB, were friends, probably friends before I knew some of the other guys as well. And we would kind of talk about like, oh, we want to like tour nationally. We want to like go to all the cool festivals and be on the road. And like, how are we going to do that? We're not really getting a lot of calls. And I feel like there is this history in Boston of like bands starting. There's so many bands that start out of Boston. So we were really good friends with the guys in the Lonely Heartstring Band. And, I think we got to kind of see the inside out of how that band got started and like, how they got to start playing nationally. And it was really inspiring when we were like, well, hey, if they can do it, we can do it. Like, we just have to find some other people. So we talked Nate, the bass player and Evan, the singer, into just like starting a band. And it was just a 4-piece for like 2 years, I think. There just wasn't really a mandolin player in the Northeast that was available. But yeah, and then we eventually got David to join on mandolin, and yeah, it was amazing. It was like such a cool time in my life, and a super hard decision to leave that band. It's like some of my closest friends. But yeah, so we had so many good adventures and made a lot of good music. But yeah, I just, I think the pandemic changed a lot, and living down here in Nashville, it just kind of, there's other things I want to explore.
You and I only set up this interview a couple days ago. It's going to air in March. But just through the joys of digital communication, this all came together very quickly. And I listened to all of the Mile 12 records again, but mostly I've been just on repeat listening to Fiddler's Pastime, your solo record, which we're going to get into in a little bit. And I wanted to ask you about your experience in the recording studio. And this could be with Mile 12 or the solo album, or if you have others as well. But the theme of this podcast is on quantization, or the lack thereof. So when it's helpful to have a click track or not, when it's helpful to auto-tune or not. And some guests, we got really deep into it, and other people, we just kind of skate right by it. But as someone who has formal training, went to a renowned music school, has been in a nationally touring band, and now you've got this critically acclaimed fiddle record. What's your experience been when recording in terms of using a click track or not, or using auto-tune or not? Where do you fall in that philosophical debate?
Oh yeah, totally. The last couple of recordings I've done, like my album, the last EP that Mile 12 did, and the full length City on a Hill, we didn't use any click tracks. Like while we were recording, the only click that we'd have was right before to give a tempo. So we'd try to start the tunes off at the same tempo so that we could switch between takes if we liked different parts of it. So that's the only thing we did there. And in my opinion, I feel like everyone can get a better groove without a metronome. If you're pushing and pulling a little, I think that can be exciting. And the worst thing is to hear someone chasing a metronome and like deliberately slowing down or speeding up. But that being said, on the first Mile 12 record and the very first EP we did, we definitely did use a click track. And I think back then, we hadn't been playing bluegrass as long together or individually. I think we needed all the help we could get. And, but I do think those albums suffered a little in terms of like just spirit. And, I think they're maybe sound a little more static. And then as far as auto-tune, the first EP and onwards definitely had a fair amount of tuning to the vocals. I think in the City on the Hill record, I don't think there was, I could be wrong, I don't think there was any tuning, but, I think if a word or something isn't in tune, they would just find a different take of that word. So just a ton of comping can work the same way.
Totally. Where do you fall in terms of the click? Well, let's change the name to a metronome right now. Just in your own practice, and I know you're an active teacher, like, is the metronome a part of your practice and the practice of your students that you assign?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I definitely use a metronome to just work on. Lately, it's been like working on speed. I feel like if I'm working on groove or anything, I'm just like playing along to a record or something, or just trying to play by myself and be groovy. But like if I'm working on speed, I think metronome is a nice thing. Yeah, and so I tell my students the same thing, and I think when you're starting out, I don't know, one of the challenges is just staying at the same tempo. So that's definitely helps my students with that, the common thing is to slow down on the hard parts and speed up on the easy parts and stuff. So that kind of makes them conscious of that.
For sure. I had a lesson yesterday with one of my students who's doing both bluegrass guitar and bluegrass fiddle with me, and we were on the metronome for almost all of the music playing portion. And my goal with everyone is to use the metronome as little as possible. But as you know, as a teacher, it's often the thing that reveals those moments. Like, where is it that I want to slow down? Or where is it that I'm going to speed up because I'm so excited that it's easy again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I try to get my students to not be scared of the metronome. There's so many that don't want to do it or just find it really, really humbling. And, but I think I always encourage them to just push past that and like recording themselves, practicing, it's like the other big thing.
Yes. Did you, when you were a student, were you assigned the metronome? Because I know for me, like, I felt like I was being punished, even though I had amazing teachers, but I had this weird idea, like, oh, if they assign the metronome, it's because I'm bad or I'm like, what was your experience?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure I was. I don't remember in particular being assigned the metronome. I remember being assigned to like be able to play faster. Like I remember I took a semester of lessons with Wes Corbett, who, you know, became a friend and stuff. But he was teaching at Berklee, and even though he was teaching banjo, like anyone could sign up for a lesson or a semester of lessons. And I just thought we'd work on like music stuff, and it was awesome, like working on improv. And I remember he said, you know, I was like really struggling to play fast. You know, it's like 120 was like capping out, and he was like, dude, like I play regularly at like 140 and like above. Like you should probably be able to play faster. So I guess he did assign the metronome in that sense.
And it worked because I feel like that's the best transition possible. Your new album, which I love so much, it's been on repeat. I think we've listened to it 6 times in the past 24 hours in my house and in the car. Fiddler's Pastime. Wes was the producer on the record.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was awesome. Like when I moved to town, or when I was talking about moving to town, he offered me a place to stay in his house. And so I rented a room in his basement for a couple months. And that was just like so nice to have a place to stay with someone I knew in a town that I didn't know. And we'd play fiddle and banjo like almost every morning. We'd like, you know, get up and have coffee and like jam for a little while, and then we'd go off and do our own things. But that kind of made me start thinking about, you know, how great it was playing with him and how much I valued his musical judgment and input. And yeah, he was like the only person I could think of that I'd want to produce that record.
Where did you make Fiddler's Pastime?
I recorded it at Ben Surratt's house, home studio in East Nashville, called the Rec Room.
And how long of a process was this? Was this just like a couple days, or did it stretch out over weeks or months as people were around and available?
I think it was 6 days of full band tracking. I think I took a couple more days to go in and do fiddle fixes and overdubs. So it was probably like 8 or so days of like total studio time. And then Dave Cinco mixed it. So he took a couple days. And that was like, you know, I recorded it right before the pandemic hit. It was like January and February of 2020. So then when we were going to mix it, like we didn't do it in person because that was like March and stuff was getting whack. So Dave had this awesome way of like kind of broadcasting it over some super high speed thing. And he and Wes and I all listened from our separate houses and were able to like talk in real time on the phone about like changes we wanted to hear. It was way cool.
That's awesome. And Cinco's actually going to be a guest on the podcast. I'm waiting for the new Punch Brothers record to come out, and that'll be out by the time your episode airs.
Cool.
But I didn't want to talk to Dave on the record until we can talk about Hell on Church Street. But I thought I remembered that Cinco was involved. Did he also master it, or did someone else?
No, David Glasser mastered it.
Oh, so like just like the all-star team, you just got all the best people involved.
Needed all the help I could get.
I don't know that you did, but it worked out. I'll put it that way. So I would love to just kind of talk through the album and then see where that takes us. The first track is an original of yours, Hendersonville Hop. What inspired this particular tune? Because you wrote it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wrote it. I was on tour with Mile 12, and I kind of knew that I was wanting to make a solo album. I think it was like the fall before we recorded, and I was like trying to come up with tune ideas, and we were staying at somebody's house in Northern Virginia, I think, and I had like a morning free, and I was like trying to practice in our minivan, which was not working super well. The bow kept hitting the ceiling, and I was like all cramped up, but I think I came up with the A part then, and I was actually in that A part, like that first lick was kind of based off a pedal steel lick. So I don't know, that probably came from pedal steel transcribing.
Amazing. See, it all pays off. When you do that, when you sit down to just like, I need to write a tune for this record I'm going to make, do you have a process that you replicate, or is it just kind of an organic thing that like you're playing, your bow's hitting the van and notes start coming out that sound like a pedal steel?
No, it's not that quite that organic. I think I come at my tune writing with like an idea of what type of tune, like the vibe and the key probably. So I was like, oh, but you know what? This tune was in A originally. So I was like, I want like a happy major tune in A. So I wrote it in A, and then Wes actually made me change it to E like 4 days before we recorded it. It did sound way better, but it was like a little bit of a challenge.
I believe it was a challenge, but I have to say, like, starting an instrumental, well, mostly instrumental bluegrass record with a fiddle tune in E is like I feel like that tune is such a moment. And like the fact that it's in E and like the energy of E is so different than A. Like A is, as you know, like growing up playing fiddle tunes from these different dance traditions and then bluegrass, like we have so many A tunes in old time music, and Irish, not as much for A major, but still, like A is a tonal center we know really well. E is like such a bluegrass key. And it has a quality that is just like unmatched, I feel like, in an instrumental. So I'm so glad to know that the tune didn't start in E, but that it ended up there. Because I feel like that's part of the character of the melody to me as someone who never heard it in A.
Right. Yeah. It's much better. And like in A, it kind of it was in the high range of the fiddle only. It was basically on the A and E string. So the E kind of brought it into like the middle range, which.
Right. Because you had to drop it down.
Yeah. It's cool.
Okay, so since we're talking about your originals, I want to work through a couple of them. The one that's very different than that is the waltz, Michelle's Waltz, which is like way more plaintive. It's in the key of F, although there's a lot of like setting up the D minor thing and going back and forth between the relative minor and the major. Is Michelle a particular person in your life, or?
Yeah, she was my cousin, and yeah, she actually like passed away a couple years ago, which was like super tragic. So I wrote a tune for her. This tune, the melody, I was just kind of messing around. Like I wanted a D minor waltz. Like I love, Lonesome Moonlight Waltz and a lot of those type of waltzes. I was just kind of messing around. Wes really helped me with the chords on that one. He helped with the chords on all of them. He had some really cool reharm ideas, but especially that one, I feel like the chords brought it to life in a whole different way that I wouldn't have thought of.
I was wondering about that because the B section, like I was listening this morning one last time, imagining I was playing along with you, and I kept being surprised, like, oh, it's an A. Oh, it's like it kept
right.
It kept not being the chord I expected, which is great on an original tune in this era. Like we don't want to just try and make a tune that sounds like it was written in the 70s necessarily.
Right, totally. Yeah, Wes, I feel like I always have the most obvious ideas for chords, and Wes is always like just turns it upside down completely. And yeah, it definitely makes me rethink, like, all right, yeah, you don't have to, like the long note that you're hitting doesn't have to be a chord tone. It's probably cooler if it's not a chord tone, Right,
that's such a good point. And I want to divert from the album analysis for a second and just talk about what it's like working with such a great producer, because one of the things I do is I produce records, and before I get signed on to produce an album, there's always this thing of like convincing someone that it's worth having a producer, because
yeah.
If you haven't had a true producer on your album, you might think, oh, that's a lot of money. It's just too much. And it's hard to quantify. Like if you pay a producer, this much money, then your album's going to be that better. But you've already talked about, like, you had this great relationship prior. He really helped with the harmony on the album. What else is the value of Wes in particular, like, working on this record? What did he change or bring to the project that might not have happened if it had just been you and the other players and the engineer?
Man, I just felt like Wes brought kind of like a musical sophistication to the whole thing. Like, I know that my background in go-to is kind of more the trad grass, and his go-to is more like jazz oriented stuff and like really new acoustic stuff. So just the harmonic stuff. I mean, he was just such a good sounding board too. Like, I brought a lot of other original tunes that didn't make the cut, and it was just great to have somebody who was, I trusted their opinion, and I knew that they would tell me if they thought something was not worth it, so he would be like, no, that's not the best you can do. Totally. And it was helpful just having him to talk through like instrumentation and like players on different songs. Like on that tune, on the song that Critters sang, like I was thinking that was just going to be sort of a more traditional, like Hartford-y, like banjo, whole band kind of song. And he and Critter were like, Critter kind of helped produce that one too, it seemed like. But he and Critter were both like, this has to be like stripped down, and I'm so glad they like insisted on that, because it turned out super magical.
I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. Well, it blowed so low, it blowed so sweet, I was laying my head down on Toulouse Street. I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. Well, I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. Well, it blowed so low, it blowed so sweet, I was laying my head down on Toulouse Street. Well, I thought I heard that Natchez whistle blow. Algiers, it maybe ghosts or the noise of trucks grinding through their gears. Oh, I thought I heard that Natchez whistle below.
I love that track, Natchez Whistle, and Critters like finger picking the guitar, and it's like it's very spare, and it doesn't have the full band hard driving sound, which makes it such a great compliment to the tracks that do. It makes everything stronger to have that contrast.
Totally. And then in terms of just like being in the studio, to have someone, I guess he was playing as well as producing, but to have someone be like, all right, that's good enough, or you need to keep going with something, was just super helpful, because it's so hard to make those decisions when you're also trying to deal with like playing the music.
Totally. Did you end up giving Wes any direction as your banjo player? Like, even though he was your producer, did you also give him some like notes on the banjos? Like, oh, I loved it when you did this, or can you roll here? Like,
man, he didn't need that. Like he did the exact right thing. But also the thing that he insisted on having, since he was playing and producing, was having someone else in there taking notes. So we hired my friend Carolyn Kendrick to like be there and just be taking, and she's a great fiddler and someone I respect. So she was taking notes on like the takes overall. That's so helpful. And then because like otherwise it's just a lot going on.
The album that I was involved in that had the most moving parts, I originally was going to have the co-producer, I was going to originally have him play guitar and help produce the album, and he just said straight up to me, like, he wanted to only produce because he didn't want to have to do what you're like. He wanted to be able to take notes and look at the whole thing and not worry too much about his own music at the time. And then he ended up overdubbing some vocals and some keyboards and all of that, but that was all after the fact. He didn't have to be an instrumentalist and run the session at the same time. So I think so highly of anyone. I know Dave Cobb will like often just sit and play rhythm guitar while working on like a Chris Stapleton song. It's cool to me that Wes can also be a banjo player while overseeing, but it makes sense to have a note taker to help just like keep track of everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And I have to say, like, as a fan of Wes Corbett, your album has some of my favorite Wes Corbett solos on it.
Oh, cool. I love his playing on bluegrass stuff. You know, like he's done so much really progressive stuff, but I also love when he brings that progressive, ideas into a more trad setting. So I just wanted to hear what he would do with some of these other players.
Is he the only banjo player on the whole record?
Yes. Yeah, he scored that honor, or like multiples of like everything else except bass, I think. But yeah, he and Jeff Bicker were the only people of their instruments.
That's what I thought. Okay, cool. And how did you get connected with Jeff? Because I first saw Jeff tour with Sarah Jarosz, and now I know he's Ricky Skaggs' bass player. But how did you get to know Jeff?
I actually got to know Jeff. We were on a gig on Joe Val up in Boston like years and years ago. He was playing with Abby Hollander, and he was playing guitar. And I think for a long time I had no idea that he was like a great bass player. I just thought he was a good bluegrass guitar player. And then he started, playing bass with Sarah, and I was like, oh yeah, he's also great at that. But yeah, so we were buddies for a while, and I tried to pick like a lot of people that I was friends with and close with to some degree, or had some kind of connection with, that, weren't just entirely strangers, just so I'd feel more comfortable,
Totally. And that makes such a difference. Like, I feel like as musicians, like we're still humans. So like whether you're relaxed or not is going to come out in the music, or whether you're excited or not is going to come out in the music.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many great like all-star recording musicians here in Nashville, but if I don't know them, I wouldn't want to be in a room with 5 or 6 people I didn't know trying to like make my album, I think I'd be too nervous.
Yeah, I feel that. But you did get some of them on your
I
record.
did.
And I think you might be on your way to becoming one of those people yourself, even if you don't feel it. But you have Tim O'Brien on a couple of the tracks. How did you get to know Tim?
I got to know Tim. I think Mile 12 opened for him a couple times at the station, and he was like nice enough to let us open for him like way back in the day when we were a very young band. I think I also met him at the acoustic music seminar that the Savannah Music Festival puts on. He was a teacher there, and I think we've just kind of run in similar circles in terms of like he's one of the few bluegrass people who's also like pretty deep in the Irish music world. So we sort of have a lot of mutual friends that way, and we can talk about Irish music too. So that's kind of cool.
Are you still pretty connected to your Irish music scene that you've known for a while?
Not that much. I mean, I'm friends with them all on Facebook and stuff, and I follow them. But like, yeah, I just don't play that anymore. So, I'll run into a few people now and again, but yeah, I feel like there's only like room in my brain for so much stuff, and the Irish music stuff has gone way back there.
I love Tim's contribution. He's singing harmony with James Key on I Don't Know Why and Hello Trouble.
Woke up this morning, happy as could be. Looked out my window, what did I see? Coming up my sidewalk, just as plain as day. Well, here comes trouble that I never thought I'd see when I went away. Hello, trouble, come on in. Well, you talk about heartaches, where in the world you been? I ain't had the miseries since you've been gone. Hello, trouble, 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 welcome home.
Yeah, Tim is... I found him to be like one of the most generous people in the scene, who could be like cold and standoffish because his credentials are just impeccable, and yet he's been one of the most encouraging and welcoming people to me, and to, I think, so many young people. He just he understands that this music only goes on if you're nice to the younger people who are learning it and playing it as well.
Yeah, he's so nice and so down to earth, and and he's the best. It's super cool.
Tell me about James Key, because I actually didn't know that name until I looked at your record, and then I've looked him up since, but for the listener and for me, who is James? What and how did you get to know him?
Yeah, James is awesome. James is a buddy who lives here in Nashville. And yeah, it's obviously a really great singer and plays mandolin and guitar. And yeah, I just got to know him through the Nashville pickin' scene. You know, he's got a weekly gig at D's with his band, the East Nash Grass, and they're kind of taking off these days. I saw they're booked at Romp next year, and they're super great. And he was running the Bluegrass night at the American Legion Hall down in East Nashville. And yeah, he's just like a guy about town who's an incredible singer. So yeah, and a buddy. So it's cool to get to have him on there.
When I was in Nashville making my record that Cinco recorded, Critter took me to that American Legion jam. I bet James was there. I never met him. We ended up in a picking session with David Greer playing like just a bunch of fiddle tunes. But I've been seeing the East Nash Grass, like their name is just exploding. Even I'm in Colorado right now. Like even just on my social media feed, I'm just seeing like videos of them and them getting booked all over the place. And I love the two of them singing together. Like, and I dig the fact that, you know, you're a fiddle player and you made a record that isn't just for people who love instrumental music, that the singing songs are not an afterthought. They're like some of the it's an album full of highlights, but like some of the highest points I think are like James and Tim singing together, or like Sarah Jarosz like blasting, like singing her heart out on Last Train. So I really appreciate that, like, you made an album that anyone who loves bluegrass is going to enjoy, because it's not just one instrumental after another.
Totally, yeah. Like some of my favorite fiddle records are like those Michael Cleveland records and that first Aubrey Haney record that have like all these guest vocalists, and you know, I mean, and like hearing those fiddlers play with the vocalists, like that's, you know, interspersed with some fiddle tunes is kind of what I want to listen to. So
yeah, same. And speaking of that concept, if I think, for me, coming to bluegrass kind of later on, Stuart Duncan has like for a lot of people been my guiding star for bluegrass fiddle and just for like tasteful playing with singers. And I of course love hearing him play instrumental music, but where he shines and where so many like Jerry Douglas I feel like shines the best is on a break between, you know, the chorus and the next verse of a song, or the little fill between one line and the next line of the vocal part. And so I think it was, you know, very smart of you. Like if you had to prove to an alien that you know how to play bluegrass, like
right.
Putting these great songs in there, it's like, yeah, she can play behind songs and she can play these great fiddle tunes. But it really is important as a bluegrass fiddle player to be able to do it all. Like it's not one or the other.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think this album was also a chance for me to just have myself record more traditional stuff that Mal 12 wasn't doing. Like, you know, some of those songs were songs that I'd pitched to Mal 12 and it was just like, wasn't the vibe. So yeah, but I just, you know, I wanted more practice and like chances to record more trad sounding stuff.
Well, it came out great. I want to ask you just about a couple more. And then my Patreon supporters are in for a real treat. Bronwyn has volunteered to give us like a 8 to 10 minute fiddle workshop that'll be only available to the Patreon supporters. So I'm so excited for that. Before we wrap up, though, tell me about how you came to record the duet with Wes, Happy Hollow, because this is actually one of my favorite old time tunes, and I was delighted to see it on the track listing and then to hear you improvise over it like a bluegrass player.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, that definitely came out of like the kitchen jams, morning kitchen jams. Yeah, that was one. I think I've known that one for a long time. I remember it was like really popular up in Boston when I was at Berklee, and we were just trying to think of like something that was a little, you know, not super standard, but would still be fun to jam over. Oh,
it was a great idea, and I wish more bluegrass players, especially when programming an album's repertoire or even just like a stage show, would pull out some of these old time fiddle tunes they're just sitting around waiting for someone to play over them, and they don't always have like a surprising chord progression, but these are melodies that have endured for a while, and so it's worth like pulling them down to the skeleton and then doing the improv that you're talking about. Happy Hollow is one of these. It's from the playing of Marcus Martin, who was from Swannanoa, North Carolina, and he played it like an A-E-A C-sharp tuning.
Oh, cool.
But I love the bluegrass treatment that y'all gave it. my favorite cuts is the Peter Rowan song Last Train that Sarah Jarosz sings. How did this come about? I bet you've known Sarah for years through the Boston scene, but how did you get her involved, and how did you choose Last Train?
Yes, I mean, yeah, Sarah's like one of my, if not my favorite, like female vocalists out there. She's just incredible. Yeah, we went to school like around the same time. She was at NEC while I was at Berklee, so definitely jammed at parties and stuff. Yeah, I was just trying to, so like, I think Wes just kind of encouraged me to ask some more well-known people, and he was like, well, what's the harm in trying, maybe they'll say yes and it'll add more, like excitement to the record or whatever. So we reached out to her, and yeah, I was kind of shocked that she said yes, but like super grateful. And then I was spent a while trying to, it's kind of a tough task being like, okay, now I have to find a song for Sarah to sing. But I was just trying to find something kind of vibey, kind of minor. Like I love, she does that stuff so well.
It's such a good choice. And it reminded me, I had the very good fortune of sitting in the balcony while Michael Daves was making his Orchids and Violence, not Orchids and Violins, but Orchids and Violence record.
Oh, cool.
That Sarah, like the bluegrass side of it was like Noam Pekelny on banjo, Mike Bubb on bass, Sarah Jarosz singing a bunch. And I remember like getting to watch them track one or two songs, and Brittany Haas was on fiddle. Mm-hmm. And then we went and had ramen for a bit. But like that album was the first time I'd seen Sarah get to play a little bit more traditional stuff in a recorded context.
Yeah.
Whereas like her own records are moving in a different direction, even though she knows the trad stuff so well.
Yeah.
And so hearing Last Train on your album just brought me back to that place of hearing her just like sing her heart out on this more trad material and remind me again of like why she is such a brilliant musician, whether it's on her new music or covering someone or singing like a really old song.
Yeah, totally. I always heard that like Tim O'Brien was one of her biggest like childhood heroes for singing, and it's kind of, she is kind of like a female Tim O'Brien in the way she sings bluegrass. And yeah, so I should have had them both sing together on something, but next record. Yeah, I think we just decided what your next record is. I'm just gonna produce a Tim O'Brien, Sarah Jarosz album.
That last train done left town. That last train done left town. I heard the whistle moaning low. That last train done gone down.
We're going to end the episode by playing the entirety of Open Water, which is one of the tunes you wrote, and it features another just total powerhouse musician and singer, Sierra Hull. Can you set this up for us?
Yeah, totally. I love that track. Yeah, I wrote that one. That was actually the first tune I wrote for the album. I started writing it in the IBMA stairwell in 2019. I was like, had some free time and was trying to write a fast G minor tune that sounded like a Ronnie McCoury tune. So that's what I ended up with.
And rather than get Ronnie, you had Sierra Hull play it, which...
Yeah, well, I just wanted to do something a little different.
Well, it's such a great track. We're going to hear it in a second. But before we do, Bronwyn, thank you so much for doing this. It's a real treat to talk to you, and I'm such a fan.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
Relax Your Grid is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Matt Brown. Tim Brown provides crucial post-production assistance. Otto Allard is the designer. Max Allard created the soothing electric guitar music sprinkled throughout the episode. Tune in next time for my conversation with Joey Ryan of the Milk Carton Kids, and until then, relax your grid.